Yeah, I mean, what a fascinating case for so many reasons, right? I mean, Nick brought it up just generally, but under the theory of insider trading, both charged by DOJ and by the SEC, legally, the victim is Coinbase, right? The notion in both cases, although they charge different statutes, is that this was confidential business information that was not to be used for personal profit. It was to be used for the benefit of Coinbase. And that essentially, at root, it's very kind of a simple case in some ways, that this information was stolen by the insider and used for his own gain. Now, DOJ, I think, very wisely here, in a way to keep this case focused on the insider trading allegations, they charged wire fraud. And, it's interesting when people think of insider trading, they don't always think of wire fraud, right? You think of securities fraud. But wire fraud actually has a very long history of being used in insider trading cases. And the kind of the seminal case is called Carpenter, which is, incredibly similar to what we saw yesterday, and also in the NFT insider trading case last month. And in short, in Carpenter, what it was there was an insider at the Wall Street Journal, and he knew when certain columns would come out, because he wrote them, about stocks. And usually when these columns came out, the stocks rose in price. And so that was very important information. And what he did was he let his friends know, hey, I'm going to write a column about this stock. And they went and traded on it. They made a handsome profit. And DOJ charged wire fraud. And when you look at it, this is DOJ saying that playbook still applies, right? Even though we're in a new era of digital currency. Now, the SEC, I think Nick really put his finger on some of the really interesting dynamics in that case, right? Because, that case is not really about whether the tokens are securities, right? I mean, but yeah, it's interesting because in the SEC case, right, Coinbase is also a victim because it was their confidential information that was allegedly stolen. But obviously they disagree with the characterizations of these tokens, and it really sets up a fascinating way that there were a trial in this matter, in the SEC matter, which is unlikely, but they happen. Coinbase would be a witness there, and it would be really interesting to see how Coinbase testifies in this case, where they are simultaneously both a victim and then also, having to talk about the issue of whether these tokens are securities when they don't believe that. And, to an earlier comment about why, the SEC cares in this case, it's a necessary element. The SEC could not have brought this insider trading case unless these tokens are securities. They don't have a wire fraud statute like the DOJ does. So DOJ said, we can do this without kind of wading into the debate about whether this is a security or not. But the SEC doesn't have that option. So they will have to prove that it's a security, and it really is a fascinating dynamic.
So could you see there end up being 9 separate trials on whether these 9 separate tokens are securities, and having Coinbase to have to intervene to decide this?
So it would be the same trial, which would also be quite interesting because there would just be a lot of kind of a side issues here, and whether Coinbase could intervene, I'm not sure, right? I mean, they're not a party to this action. They have not been charged in either case. So it's really, this is the first case, right? So we'll see how it plays out. There is no playbook for this. I mean, the one thing I will say though is, if you listen to the speeches of Gary Gensler, which I think are a really necessary thing for anyone in the crypto space, because he is extremely blunt and clear in his intentions and what he views. He's called tokens security tokens, right? I mean, he has said he doesn't think that there needs to be new legislation. He doesn't think there needs to be new laws. His claim is that the old laws, from the 1930s, the Exchange Act, his clear statements are that applies. And we should believe him that he will follow through in those beliefs.
Did the SEC jump into this because they wanted to call these securities? And if so, first of all, could we see Coinbase actually join up with the defendant in this very case and say, well, he shouldn't be charged with insider trading because it wasn't a securities. It wasn't securities. It was wire fraud, but these weren't securities. So we're gonna side with the defendant against us. Even though we're the victim, we're siding with him, and we'll even cover the legal costs to prevent the SEC from calling these securities. In other words, do they have more of an interest to fight the SEC than they do to fight the defendant?
So I don't think so, but they are really going to have to walk a fine line, it seems, because look, on the one hand, this is a defendant that violated their policies, and Coinbase, if you read the indictment and the SEC complaint, had very strong policies in this area, and that's a good thing, right? Because if they didn't have policies, they could face civil liability for lawsuits for permitting insider trading on their platform. So I think it's, on the one hand, Coinbase is obviously they do not want employees able to do this, right? On the other hand, though, they've made a public statement that these are not securities. So it is a very, very interesting dynamic, and we'll see how it plays out.
Interesting. Also, some of the arguments used in the complaint also address some new issuance terminology like fair launch and a non-users, issuers rather. So it'll be interesting how that plays out and it gets defined in these proceedings. Also, Coinbase filed a petition to the SEC already criticizing the current state of crypto regulation in the United States, saying that without effective regulation, the U.S. will fall behind in digital asset innovation. And so, to that degree, do you agree? And are regulators to blame to an extent for this lack of clarity and having to use enforcement actions to bring that clarity?
Well, I think what regulators would say is enforcement actions are there for a reason. When someone breaks a rule, whether intentionally or negligently, it is enforcement regulators' role to bring a case. And there are certain benefits from proceeding by enforcement, right? I mean, that then this case will be before a judge. There will be likely opinions written. A lot of really good legal minds will address the issue of whether a token is a security. And so there is, people say regulation by enforcement. It's a little bit of a misnomer, or it's a little bit kind of overhyped, because there always has been, and there can be some clarity that comes from that. I think it really depends on the regulator, right? This is a really interesting area, right? We just had legislation come out last month, in the Senate, which presumably defined a lot of tokens as commodities, although then there were some statements after the fact that called that into question. And so this is the SEC saying, really, we don't need any new regulations here. A security, a token acts like a security, it walks like one, and we're going to treat it like one for an insider trading case.